Speed is not merely a number on a dial. Speed is a narcotic. And in the summer of 1938, it was the most dangerous addiction flowing through the veins of Europe. Today, we take velocity for granted. You board a high-speed train, you open your laptop, you sip your coffee. Outside the window, the world is nothing but a silent green blur. You are detached from the physics of motion. You are floating in a pressurized, climate-controlled tube, insulated from the reality of the speed you are traveling. But there was a time when speed was not comfortable. Speed was violent. Speed was a physical assault on the senses. It was the roar of a man-made fire, the scream of escaping steam, the smell of burning oil, and the terrifying metallic taste of fear. We often think of machines as cold, unfeeling objects, dead metal. But history proves us wrong. Some machines have a soul. Some machines have an ego. And some, like the one we are about to discuss, have a death wish. We are looking back at the twilight of an era, the final glorious days of the age of steam, before the clinical silence of electricity and the hum of diesel took over the world. Humanity built one last monster to challenge the laws of physics. This is not just a story about a train. This is a story about a geopolitical duel between an empire in decline and a fascist regime on the rise. It is the story of an engineer who tried to tame the wind using secrets learned from birds. And it is the story of a blue metal beast that literally tore its own heart out to prove a point. This is the legend of the Mallard, and this is the story of the last Titan. To understand why a steam locomotive had to be pushed to the brink of total destruction, we must first look at the map of Europe in the 1930s. The clouds of the Second World War were gathering, but the cannons were not yet firing. Instead, the war was being fought on the railways. Technology was propaganda. Every rivet driven, every record broken was a statement of national superiority. And in this arena, the British Empire, the birthplace of the railway, the nation that gave the world the Industrial Revolution, was being systematically humiliated. The challenger was Nazi Germany. Under the Third Reich, Germany was obsessed with the concept of modernism and efficiency. They weren't just building autobahns to move troops, they were revolutionizing the railways to move the masses. In 1933, they unveiled the Fliegende Hamburger, the flying hamburger. It was a shock to the system. It was a sleek, diesel-powered train set that looked like something from a science fiction novel. It was clean, it was efficient, and it tore between Berlin and Hamburg at sustained speeds of 100 miles per hour. It made the journey in 2 hours and 18 minutes. The world press watched in awe. They saw the future, and it wasn't burning coal. It was burning diesel. It wore a swastika, not a Union Jack. For the directors of the London and North Eastern Railway, the LNER, this was unacceptable. The railway was the nervous system of Britain. It was the symbol of her industrial might. If they couldn't hold the title for speed, they couldn't hold the title for dominance. But the Germans weren't the only threat. Closer to home, a domestic war was raging. The rival company, the LMS, London, Midland and Scottish Railway, was also building streamlined trains. The Coronation Scot was setting records, stealing headlines, and capturing the imagination of the British public. The LNER was being squeezed from both sides, from across the Channel by German efficiency and from across London by domestic rivals. The board of directors issued an ultimatum that echoed through the smoke-filled boardrooms of London: do not let them win. But the problem was physics. Conventional wisdom stated that steam power had hit a wall. Engineers believed that at 100 miles per hour, the air became as solid as concrete. The resistance was too high. Furthermore, the mechanics of a steam engine are violent. Heavy steel pistons smash back and forth hundreds of times a minute. At high speeds, this reciprocating mass creates a hammering effect that can shatter steel and warp tracks. To go faster, you didn't just need a bigger fire, you needed a miracle. You needed to cheat the wind. Britain didn't need a mechanic, they needed an artist. Sir Nigel Gresley. In the pantheon of engineering, there are those who calculate and there are those who dream. Gresley was a dreamer who happened to be a mechanical genius. He was the chief mechanical engineer of the LNER, a man of imposing stature and even more imposing intellect. While his rivals were simply adding more horsepower, Gresley was looking at nature. He was an observer. He spent hours watching birds, specifically wild ducks. He was fascinated by the mallard duck. He studied how its body cut through the water and the air with zero turbulence. He realized that the enemy of speed wasn't weight, it was drag. If he wanted to beat the German diesels, he couldn't just build a stronger train. He had to build a train that the wind couldn't see. This was a radical departure for British design. Locomotives were supposed to be rugged, exposed mechanical beasts. You were supposed to see the pipes, the rivets, the pulsating muscle of the machine. Gresley wanted to wrap his machine in a smooth, aerodynamic shell. He turned to the wind tunnel, a tool reserved for the fledgling aviation industry. He built wooden models and subjected them to smoke streams at the National Physical Laboratory. He watched how the smoke behaved. He noticed a critical flaw in older designs. At high speeds, the smoke from the chimney would drift down, creating a dense fog bank that blinded the driver. It was a lethal flaw. Gresley's solution was elegant. He designed the locomotive's nose in a distinctive wedge shape. As the train cut through the air, the wind would hit the wedge and be forced upward, creating a powerful updraft that carried the smoke over the cab, keeping the driver's vision clear. It was brilliant. It was the Bugatti of the rails. In fact, Gresley was close friends with Ettore Bugatti, and the influence of race car design was undeniable. But the traditionalists hated it. They called it a toy. They said covering the wheels would make maintenance impossible. They said the streamlining was a gimmick. They mocked the shape. But Gresley ignored them. He sat at his drafting table, surrounded by tobacco smoke, and finalized the blueprints for a new class of locomotive, the Class A4. On paper, it was perfect. It was a seamless blend of art and violence. But a drawing cannot break a world record. To prove his theory, they had to build the beast, and they had to build it in the fires of Doncaster. The year is 1938, the Doncaster Works. Imagine a cathedral, but instead of incense, the air is thick with coal dust and the smell of ozone. Instead of hymns, the air is filled with the deafening staccato of rivet guns and the hiss of welding torches. This is where the legend was forged. Chassis number 4468. Gresley didn't just give this machine a beautiful skin, he gave it the heart of an athlete. The secret weapon was hidden inside the smoke box. It was called the double Kyle Chap exhaust system. In a standard steam engine, the used steam struggles to escape the cylinders after it has done its work. This creates back pressure that chokes the engine at high speeds. It's like trying to run a sprint while breathing through a thin straw. The Kyle Chap system was like having two sets of lungs. It utilized a double chimney and 4 blast pipes that allowed the steam to exit explosively and efficiently. This created a massive vacuum that drew the fire hotter and hotter, allowing the boiler to generate steam at a rate previously thought impossible. Gresley also utilized a 3-cylinder design, 2 on the outside, visible to the public, and 1 hidden deep between the frames, driving the center axle. This provided a smoother application of power. While other trains hammered the tracks like a drum, the A4 glided. And then there was the paint. British locomotives were usually a somber green or black, utilitarian colors for a utilitarian age. But Gresley wanted the world to see this train coming. He chose a color that would become immortal. Garter blue, a vivid electric royal blue. The wheels were painted coronation red. When it rolled out of the shed, it didn't look like a piece of machinery. It looked like a missile. It was named Mallard. But a weapon is useless without a soldier to wield it. The LNER needed a crew that was willing to push this experimental machine beyond its safety limits. They found Joseph Duddington. Joe Duddington was 61 years old. He wasn't a young hotshot, he was a veteran driver who knew every inch of the main line. He was known for being heavy-handed with the regulator. He was a man who drove by instinct, not by the book. He was arrogant, perhaps, but he was the best. Beside him was Thomas Bray, the fireman, a man with shoulders of granite. His job was physically impossible. At top speed, the engine would consume coal at a rate of several tons per hour. Bray had to shovel coal into a white-hot furnace while balancing on a vibrating metal plate at over 100 miles per hour. One slip could mean death. The date was set. Sunday, July 3rd, 1938. The location, Stoke Bank. This stretch of track south of Grantham was chosen for a reason. It wasn't flat. It was a long, gentle downhill gradient. Gravity would be their ally. A dynamometer car, a laboratory on wheels, was hooked up behind the tender to record the speed scientifically. The engineers inside were nervous. They had done the math. They knew that at speeds approaching 120 miles per hour, the centrifugal force on the turbine blades and the friction in the bearings would enter the red zone. The middle cylinder, buried under the boiler, was the weak point. Unlike the outside cylinders, it had no airflow to cool it down. It was encased in heat. If it overheated, the bearing would melt. If the bearing melted, the connecting rod could detach.
If the rod detached at that speed, it would act like a giant steel flail, tearing the bottom of the train apart and derailing them instantly. They were sitting on a beautiful blue bomb. Duddington climbed into the cab, adjusted his greased cap, and looked at Bray. The pressure gauge was trembling at the maximum, 250 pounds per square inch. The safety valves were hissing, screaming to be released.
The journey began deceptively smoothly. As Mallard crested the top of Stoke Bank, Duddington was already doing 75 miles per hour. This was a normal cruising speed. But as the nose of the train dipped onto the decline, the game changed. Duddington didn't just let gravity take over. He opened the regulator wide. He advanced the cutoff to 40%. In layman's terms, he flooded the cylinders with steam. He was forcing the engine to consume more power than it was designed to handle. He was asking the machine to destroy itself. The acceleration was brutal. Within moments, the speedometer climbed to 100 miles per hour. The noise inside the cab was apocalyptic. There is no insulation in a steam locomotive. It is a sensory assault. The wind howled through the gaps in the floorboards. Coal dust swirled in the air, coating the men's faces in black grime, turning the whites of their eyes into ghostly circles. 110 miles per hour. They were now moving faster than the Hurricane fighter planes flying overhead. The sensation of speed was terrifying. The telegraph poles on the side of the track became a solid picket fence. The stations blurred past like momentary explosions of brick and concrete. The firebox was a gaping maw of white heat. Tommy Bray was shoveling coal in a rhythmic trance, one scoop every 5 seconds, fighting the G-forces that tried to throw him against the tender wall. The heat was blistering. The floor was shaking so violently that it was hard to stand. 115 miles per hour. The vibration changed frequency. It wasn't shaking anymore, it was humming. A high-pitched, terrifying resonance that rattled the teeth of the engineers in the recording car behind. Plates were smashing in the dining car. The suspension was bottoming out. The train was effectively flying, only tapping the rails every few meters. 126 miles per hour. They were now in uncharted territory. No steam train had ever sustained this. The German record was in sight. And then the smell hit them. It wasn't the smell of coal. It wasn't the smell of oil. It was the sickly sweet, unmistakable scent of aniseed. Engineers had embedded small glass capsules of aniseed oil into the metal of the big end bearings. It was a crude, low-tech warning system. If the metal got too hot, the capsule would melt, releasing the smell. It was a stink bomb designed to tell the driver, "Stop immediately or you will die." The smell filled the cab. It choked Duddington and Bray. The middle cylinder was dying. The white metal bearing, unable to cope with the insane friction, was turning into liquid. Steel was grinding against steel. The structure of the locomotive was failing. Duddington smelled the aniseed. He knew exactly what it meant. He knew that beneath his feet the heart of the Mallard was disintegrating. Any other driver would have slammed on the brakes, But Joe Duddington was not any other driver, and this was not a test run. This was war. He didn't close the regulator, he kept it open. He looked at the speedometer and chose glory over survival. He bet his life and the lives of everyone on board that the molten metal would hold for just a few seconds longer. The needle on the dynamometer traced a line that looked like a mountain peak. 123, 124, 125. The locomotive was screaming. Sparks were showering from the wheels like fireworks. The blue paint on the smoke box was blistering from the heat. The entire train was a blur of blue and steam against the English countryside. 126. 126 miles per hour. 202 kilometers per hour. For a brief, shining moment, Mallard touched the face of God. The German record was smashed. The impossible had been achieved. Duddington saw the marker post at the bottom of the hill and finally, mercifully, closed the throttle. He applied the brakes. The friction was so intense that the cast iron brake blocks caught fire, sending trails of orange sparks into the afternoon air. As the train slowed, the rhythmic chuff-chuff of the exhaust was gone, replaced by a horrific, uneven clanking sound. When Mallard finally limped into Peterborough station, it was a broken hero. The middle big end bearing had completely melted away. The connecting rod was blue from heat trauma. The piston was ruined. The engine was crippled. It literally sacrificed itself to cross that line. The crew climbed down, their faces black with soot, their eyes wide with the adrenaline of survival. They looked at the machine that had almost killed them, and they patted its hot, ticking metal skin. That record, 126 miles per hour, was set on July 3rd, 1938. And here is the most haunting part of this story. It has never been broken. Diesel came. Electric came. We have trains today that can do 300 miles per hour effortlessly. But no steam locomotive has ever gone faster than Mallard. It stands today in a museum in York, silent and cold. But if you stand close to it, if you look past the polished brass and the clean lines, you are looking at a machine that chose to die rather than to lose. The age of steam didn't fade away quietly. It didn't rust in a scrapyard. It went out with a scream, a flash of blue, and the smell of aniseed on the wind.
History is written in the past, but the future of rail is being built today. For the latest technologies, industry news, and engineering breakthroughs, continue the journey at railwaynews.net.